Hey everybody, welcome to the Sports File, a 35-year reboot. Had to jump on real quick. This will just be solely focused on the Denver Broncos this week. This will be a quick hit, and then we'll record another episode later this week. So this is episode 5 of the Sports File, 35-year reboot, and we're going to be talking about the breaking news that came down today. The Denver Broncos trade for Zach Wilson, former number 2 overall draft pick a few years ago, in exchange for some essentially, some a sixth and a seventh round pick. It looks like they picked up Wilson in a seventh round pick in exchange for a sixth round pick. So Denver didn't really give up a whole lot. In fact, they actually probably, you would say, to take a flyer on Zach Wilson, not a bad move. So what does this mean? Look at Zach Wilson and where he was. He never really worked out with the Jets. I think he's entering his fourth year now. First 2 years not great. Last year they trade for Aaron Rodgers, and then he becomes the backup, and then he's thrust into the spotlight once again when Aaron goes out with the Achilles tendon tear. And then it just wasn't going to work there. I think essentially they didn't do great under him again. Couple factors in play. I mean, if you really want to maybe look at this and figure out where it is and maybe where it didn't go wrong. Big believer, and if you listen to various people and you listen to my podcast, I think the world of Colin Cowherd. And a lot of his takes are pretty good, and he is right about this one. Is the quarterback? It really is dependent on where do you land, right? Where are you? And what he means by that when he says this is, are you going with a defensive coach as the head coach, or an offensive minded coach, right? And so poor Zach Wilson gets drafted by the Jets. Robert Saleh, hot coach a few years ago, was a defensive coordinator for the 49ers, was hired by the Jets. They draft Zach Wilson, and now he's stuck with this kind of defensive coordinator for the first 2 years. Last year, he gets double whammy where they hire Aaron Rodgers' friend, former Denver Broncos coach Nathaniel Hackett. We all know how that worked out. Disaster. I would say this guy is a complete disaster, even with the Jets. He has clearly have no idea what he's really doing. His father was not a very good coach, and Nathaniel Hackett is definitely not a very good coach. So, if you're Sean Payton, what are you thinking right now, right? You get Zach Wilson, a former number 2 overall pick, went in the same class as Trevor Lawrence. So Trevor Lawrence went 1, Zach went 2. A lot of folks, building up again. A lot of smoke and mirrors with the draft. Was he going to be the number 1 overall pick? He has, massive arm talent. Just really good pocket presence, but playing out in Utah, kind of an unknown conference, and everybody. I think Trevor Lawrence had a ton of hype around him, and we'll see how that turns out with Jacksonville. He's a pretty decent quarterback, but is he a generational talent? We'll see. So Zach Wilson goes number 2, lands with the Jets, gets a defensive-minded head coach, and doesn't turn out great. Sean Payton of the Denver Broncos, now cleaning up the mess left behind with Russell Wilson, takes a chance. Low risk, really low risk, high reward type trade here. Is you get Zach Wilson, and so always these offensive minded, I think coaches think that they can fix him, right? I think in his head he's thinking, I can mold this guy, I can shape this guy. I think when Zach Wilson's coached up properly and he plays within his limits, he's a pretty decent quarterback. Really, he's not that bad. I think where he goes off the quote unquote reservation is it's the little stuff that he's supposed to do. Those little dink and dunks, and is where he can't seem to make the layup, as you would say in basketball, right? He just can't do it. So is Sean Payton going to be able to coach him and maybe rehab him? Sean Payton said he's probably thinking, yeah, I'm the guy. I can be the quarterback whisperer to Zach Wilson to make it. Now, I don't think this actually solidifies that the Broncos are saying, okay, Zach, you're our guy, and Jared Stidham will become the backup. What I think this really tells now is that Peyton, Sean Payton and George Payton have been saying for the last few weeks, last couple months really, is that if there's a quarterback you really like, you trade away the farm and you go after him. I mean, what I think they're finding is the price is way too high to get into one of the top three or four quarterbacks. I just think they're out of reach. You can't get you're not going to get Caleb Williams at the one pick. You're not going to get Jaden Daniels. You're not going to get Drake May at the third pick. Probably JJ McCarthy is out of reach. There's a lot of buzz. He's probably going to be. I mean, some mock drafts have four quarterbacks going in the first four picks. I think JJ McCarthy probably slips down a little bit. But what Sean Payton and George Payton are probably thinking is, look, we got Zach Wilson. Now this is a clear indication at the 12 pick. You're trading back, right? You're going to trade back at this point. I would be shocked if they said at 12. I think what they'll do is they're gonna trade that pick away, move down slightly, move down to maybe 18 or 19. I think off the top of my head, the next quarterback that probably needs or a team that needs a quarterback rather that would be drafting for the future is probably the LA Rams. So maybe you slide in right before them around the 18th pick, and you're able to at that point. I think they would still consider a quarterback there at that point, maybe a Bo Nix or Michael Penix, right? And then what you're doing is you're saying, we were able to get more draft picks. You're probably going to get another draft pick for some team moving up to 12 to take who they want. You can figure that could be another second round pick or something like that. And then they'll be able to slide back and perhaps draft their Bo Nix or Michael Penix, and there's their quarterback for the future. So you'd go into the year with a potential quarterback situation in Denver of Zach Wilson, Jared Stidham, and Michael Penix slash Bo Nix. Not bad. You'd be able to get draft picks, which you desperately need, since they've we all know we've talked about in previous episodes what they gave away for this. I think it's an interesting play. I think Tom Palarusa from NFL Network who broke it. He was interesting. He broke it on the air with the herd today with Colin, and he said out loud, "I've had this in my drafts for Twitter for the last month." So clearly, the Broncos have been waiting to pull the trigger on this. I think what happened was they probably had a deal in place with the Jets, maybe upwards to a month, maybe it was 2, 3 weeks ago. And then what they were trying to do is, can we get into those top three or four draft picks, the quarterbacks coming out that we talked about, whether it was Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, or JJ McCarthy. I think ultimately what happened is the price was too high, and they decided, you know what, we can't afford to give up more draft picks, potentially a player, to get into that realm. Why don't we take a chance on Zach Wilson, draft the quarterback we like just further down in the first round, and maybe they go in a completely different direction and they take a flyer on one of these quarterbacks that'll be in the second or third round. But I think it makes sense for the Broncos. Now we clearly know that the draft collateral was way too much to get into there. Keep hearing rumblings the Patriots are dangling the third pick overall. Trying to get out of that. So they probably found out that it's way too expensive, and our best thing approach was to make this trade that we had in principle a few weeks ago, upwards to a month, according to Tom, and just pull the trigger and let's go forward with Zach Wilson. So that's the situation. I know there's a bunch of moms that are probably happy about Zach Wilson. And if you don't get that inside joke, do some Googling on Zach Wilson and moms, and you'll see what I'm referring to. Anyways, that's the latest episode here. Be back later this week with a full-on pod where we're really going to focus on. Probably we'll do this right after the draft, probably Friday. So we'll look at what the Broncos ended up doing with the first round of who they ended up going with. We'll also talk about the Nuggets now that they're in the playoffs and they just waxed LA in the first game. So let's see if they can continue the run, and then we'll talk a little bit of Avalanche and of course Tottenham Hotspurs, and I'll be back to talk about a restaurant recommendation. So stay tuned for the next episode of the Sports File, a 35-year reboot, and I'll talk to you guys later this week. Thanks.